All right, looks like we're recording. All right.
Okay, this is a presentation on ain't, created by Bailey Lowe, Natalie Fisher, Sydney Carson, Sarah Turner, and Molly Ogden. So first, a basic description. Ain't receives meager academic acknowledgement as a real word and is often considered non-standard English. It generally replaces aren't, isn't, haven't, hasn't, won't, and am not, which has no established contraction. The Pocket Fowler's modern English usage explains that the formation of ain't is irregular, which in part accounts for the stigma attached to it. Unlike other contractions, such as isn't, aren't, and haven't, the word ain't is not a reduced form of any known logical ancestor. According to the Merriam-Webster English Dictionary, ain't is commonly used in informal writing, dialogue, and music. In the book Indexed English, Wilma R. Ebbett says, quote, ain't never appears in formal writing, and rarely in expository prose except when a speaker is being quoted. In general writing, use of ain't is almost always a deliberate attempt to suggest informality or humor or down-to-earth common sense.
Okay, so some grammar behind the use of ain't. The word ain't is a contraction for am not, has not, and have not within the English language vernacular, often additionally representing do not, does not, did not in certain dialects. So contraction represents a shortening of a word, syllable, or word group by omission of a sound or letter, such as like they will, and they'll, and that was found with the Merriam-Webster. Contractions were first used in the 17th century, limited mainly to written fictions and dramas. Over the following 19th and 20th centuries, contractions became implemented within additional works, such as prose letters or journalism or just more descriptive texts.
All right, so some history behind the word ain't. It originated from about the 17th or 18th century, depending on the source that you look at. Its original form was int or ant. Other variations were innit or amped. And when ain't first came about, everyone kind of used the word. Linguists from classical society felt that they were losing control of the word as it became more widespread because it was being used for words that didn't have a contraction for. They decided to take the word away entirely from educated speech and writing, which was understood by the educated, but and they stopped using it. But this information didn't effectively reach the uneducated, and thus it became a social marker of someone's lack of education. When ain't was first used in writing and in the early 18th century, the spelling represented the way of pronouncing the word. Nowadays, we tend to pronounce a word according to the way that we see it spelled. Thus, ain't looks stranger to us than it did to those who spoke it and wrote it about 2 or 3 centuries ago, according to Merriam-Webster. It's more embedded in American English than in British English, but it still exists in British English, which we'll see in a couple examples later in the slides. And according to the Cambridge Guide to English, it says both ain't and aren't are probably descended from ant, recorded during the late 17th century as a regular contraction.
So some dialects that commonly use the word ain't. Ain't is a widespread feature of non-standard English dialects, both in Great Britain and in the US. Some of the non-standard English dialects in the US that commonly use ain't are the African American English dialect and the Southern American English dialect. These two dialects are often portrayed in very similar ways by fiction authors in their dialogue, such as the novel The Help by Catherine Socket. So Sockett's writing, she uses actually quite few markers to indicate that one of her characters, Celia, is from the Deep South through her dialect usage, even though that's what Socket was intending to do. And so Socket fails to accurately portray the Southern English speech. She instead tries to make the character sound poor. The author also commonly uses the African American English dialect incorrectly as well in an attempt to make her characters sound uneducated and poor. So in the past, ain't has been a marker to indicate uneducated, but that just really isn't the case anymore. The word ain't is used in so many ways in so many different dialects, not just by uneducated and poor. So that's really something that writers need to understand when they try to write characters with these dialects. So some really well-known examples of the word ain't in these different dialects is the African American English and Ain't I a Woman. So this is a speech by Sojourner Truth. It's quite famous. Southern English, or Southern American English, he ain't company Cal, he's just a Cunningham. This is from the book To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which is also a quite well-known book. And British English, it makes me look half-witted, which I ain't, which is a quote said by Winston Churchill, who I think we would all agree is not uneducated.
So we did 2 corpus searches just to look at the usage of ain't over the times. And the first one is from the Corpus of Historical American English. Now this one goes back way to 1810 and goes to 2009. So that's not quite as modern, but the other one goes into more modern times. But as you can see, the usage of ain't spikes in 1910 and 1920 by quite a bit. And then it starts going down a little bit more. But some of you can see the context of when these are used. And I thought it was really interesting in the next slide, how you can see that a lot of the context in which ain't was used, it was more of the contraction of is not. That was basically all of them. I think I found one that was am not, but the rest were is not. And for the next corpus that we searched up, that was the Corpus of Contemporary American English. And this is more modern times. This one goes from 1990 to 2019. So it's always being updated. It hasn't updated for 2020 yet, but it's getting there. And as you can see, the usage of ain't has sort of like become leveled, hasn't been going up and down more. It's still being used though, and as you can see in the context in the next slide of where it's being used, ain't is being used more as a double negative, and it's also being used in different, like for different contractions. So there's more of the am nots than is nots as well. And then for our next slide, we have our citations. So if you wanted to look at our sources and go there, you can find it there. And thank you for your time. Okay, sweet. And that was 7 minutes and 20 seconds.
Yeah, I think we all were a little less rambly that time. I know I was.
I